China is placing a heavy bet on science. The country's two prime goals, a moderately prosperous society by 2020 and a fully modernized country by 2050, depend on technological advances and an innovative spirit, both of which are founded on science and require a scientific way of thinking. But for China's science to fulfill its mission, how must it adapt? How to promote creativity? How to encourage critical thinking? How to transform a system of hierarchies that privileges seniority and networking into a meritocratic system that rewards productivity and results? How to allocate research funds efficiently? What's the optimum role of government? We cannot avoid the dark side. What about scientific fraud, fabrication, and plagiarism? Investigating how science must change takes us closer to China.
The college entrance exam, or Gao Kao in Chinese, is the most important test for Chinese students. It covers subjects like literature, math, foreign languages, physics, and so on. And it is held once a year. Most universities in China admit students based on their performance on this exam. It's 5:30 in the morning. Students at Hengshui High School are doing morning exercises, each with a textbook in hand. They jog at the same pace and in the same formation. During the recess, students glance at their textbooks and try to memorize. This is a boarding school in Hebei province, known for its semi-military style management. There are similar schools in Hengshui. The city is not known for its economic development, but it's becoming known for its education. After jogging, students flock to the classroom to read out loud. They spend every minute studying in order to achieve a better score. They're fiercely intent to gain admission to a good university.
Life here is painful in a certain sense. We are tired every day.
Gao Kao is a hurdle that I must pass. I must work hard for Gao Kao and my dream in the future.
Their efforts finally pay off. The school has developed most of Hebei's top scorers in recent years. But this teaching method is not without controversy. To some, such spoon-feeding kind of education stunts innovation capacity. But to many students from a poor family background, the Gao Kao is perhaps the only way they can change their future.
Joining me are Zhang Jing'an, chairman of the China Society of Reform and Science, Run Yuling, a former science official and expert on science productivity and education, and Dr. Lu Bai, a neuroscientist who spent over 20 years in the US and is now at Tsinghua University. If one looks at Chinese society historically, there is great respect for elders, which is very laudatory, of course. And then we have an educational system which generally in China has been more memorization than creativity. So aren't both of those elements to think critically? Isn't there a challenge in China today?
Huge challenge. And this is something that is very, very difficult to change, especially given the current system of test-based. You know, they say your fate is determined when you're in the kindergarten, right? I mean, it's all driven by Gao Kao. There's a university entrance exam, right? So in order to have a high, I mean, it's a one test that determines where you're going.
A big problem with China's current education system is that the sole purpose of many students for learning is just to make their way to universities, a phenomenon that we call exam-oriented learning. But it can't work if students just learn for exams. That's why we're now working to make a change. We want to change the exam-oriented model to cultivate real talent by nurturing them with knowledge in a well-rounded way. This is the direction we're heading to.
Some of China's high schools are piloting reforms. One significant change is the introduction of the optional class system. Afternoons at Hangzhou No. 2 High School bustle with club activities. Students here can tailor their own syllabus from a variety of classes. This is quite different from most Chinese high schools where students take only compulsory classes. Experts believe this gives students more freedom to develop their own interests. Mr. Chen teaches in this school. What he teaches is not literature, math, or any of the subjects in the college entrance exam. His course is called Exploratory, and it aims to help students to find projects they like.
The students have learned a lot in school. In the end, they will put the theory into practice. The exploratory course provides the method for this.
For this innovative course, only 6 classes are given inside the classroom. Mr. Chen helps students figure out proper personal projects, and he coaches them on how to pursue them, which they then do on their own. By offering each student the right to choose his or her own future, the school helps them develop their own specialty.
You have on your website a note to prospective students that if anybody's going to join your lab, they need to be able to think critically and think creatively. So how important are those two concepts as we look at the totality of science in China?
Well, I think if you ask me what's the most important factors, I think these are the two. For science, you always have to keep a piece of skepticism. What's published, they're always, I mean, it's all done by human being, which, is not perfect. So that's one aspect. So in the lab, we often ask students to look at a paper published in Science and Nature and say, what's wrong in there? And I can tell a little story when I was at Cornell in my first year graduate students. And only through a few months, I was doing an exam, my first exam of biochemistry. And the professor told us that you can spend an entire day to answer the question. You can work in the library, you can look at any books you want. And he handed us to an article of a Scientific American and say, find what's wrong in this article. So that basically trained me, to think critically, to really look at the facts and see what's wrong in that. So that's very important, to be able to criticize. Even with very high authority, people who get a Nobel Prize, they could have done something wrong too. It's not on purpose. The second thing is to think creatively. That is, you have to think science is a very competitive field, and a lot of great minds in there, and they can think of things that you can think as well. So in order to be able to win the competition, you have to think from different angles. You have to think out of the box. You have to. So I told students in many lectures, I said there are 3 things if you do, I can guarantee you will publish a good paper. One is to address an important question, scientific question. If you can pick an important question, that's number one. Lay the foundation. The second thing is to try to solve the scientific problem in a creative and innovative way, in a unique way that others cannot think of. And then the third thing is to do the experiment rigorously, that you use a different approach, a different method, and finally prove this. If you can do all 3, if you cannot get the paper into first-ranked journals, you come to me.
Meet China's decision makers and thought leaders. See them in action, hear their views, debate their policies. Meet China's leaders with me. I'm Robert Lawrence Kim.
In Western countries, the assessment of scientific projects and personnel are usually done by peer review, by independent scientists themselves managed by independent professional facilitators. Such a system has not been well established in China. Instead, the government and the management of research institutions themselves carry out the evaluation. This can lead to fraud and corruption, caused by the lack of independence and conflicts of interest due to close links between the two sides. Moreover, some criteria the authorities use are controversial. For example, to evaluate researchers in both basic and applied science by the number of papers they publish does not motivate the researchers to develop practical techniques or commercially viable products. But the Chinese government has vowed to make adaptations.
We'll form a committee consists of senior experts to do appraisal before each major scientific project is launched. We also hire professional agents to manage each project. The government and supervisors of science and technology will not manage the programs themselves.
The system of evaluation, system of meritocracy, if you will, that's the key part. The most important thing in all these is people, right? It's the scientist, it's the talent. That's where you need to focus. So how do you recruit scientists? It has to be based on merit. Once you're recruiting scientists, you have to give them the best support, not based on seniority, but based on your potential and your past achievement, right?
We really failed to do enough to motivate young people to take the lead. Particularly in allocating research funds, seniority and connections always dictate the flow of funding. For their lack of social status, certain qualifications, and other reasons, young researchers simply cannot get the money. It's quite common for them to work for their seniors who get funds. But this situation must be changed in the future.
And then there should be an evaluation system that will judge a scientist in the 5-6 year period, that whether you perform well or not. I think that's the perhaps the most important part. That you can call it HR reform or talent evaluation system change. That I would say will fundamentally change what you mentioned, hierarchical, respect to elderly, and some of the government controls, or I would call it administrative interference, not government control, interference of academic affair. Those are all academic affairs. Who's doing well, who's not doing well, should not be judged by officials.
Academician is the highest honor a scientist or an engineer can achieve in China. The country's top scientific advisory organizations, the Chinese Academy of Sciences and the Chinese Academy of Engineering, elect new academicians every other year. The academician system has bred multiple issues, which have come to light during the last few years. For example, as the title is coupled with power and benefits, experts say an academician has great influence over research and development budgets, especially in initiating scientific projects. Media have reported bribes involved in the election of academicians, which is a total perversion of the system. Recently, the Chinese government has introduced a host of new policies to make the elections fair and clean. For example, high-ranking officials are no longer allowed to be nominated as candidates for academicians. Academicians are also forbidden to do commercials or take part in other activities not relevant to their scientific fields.
This brings up the whole way that scientists and top engineers are evaluated in China. What's your analysis of that traditional approach?
Well, the key, I'd get down right to the bottom. The key is current system is coupled honor with benefits. Benefits to your personal benefits, and benefits to the institution. So the entire engines is, mobilized to support an institution, will support someone to get elected, and that person will do everything there is possible to get himself elected in some positive campaigns and negative campaigns, trashing others. There are all kinds of, you name it, that something that, I don't like to see, but it's happening.
But that would happen any place whenever there's. Does China is it worse in China than it would be in the U.S.?
Far worse than the U.S. For example, if you get elected, in some places, in the entire province, the governor of the province will say, I want to recruit this person, whatever it takes. Whatever it takes means I will give him a house. I will give him, whatever amount of money to do research. I'll give him whatever kind of resources. I will treat him as you probably don't know, the academicians are treated as vice ministers, and they have red carpets and they have a special way to go to the airport and that kind of things. So, I mean, have you heard about the U.S. member of the academy will have a personal chauffeur or will have a private cars that, 24 hours working for you? There's nothing. I mean, it's an honor. I mean, it's a way the academic community recognize you. So you may have some stronger voice in terms of evaluating certain things, but that's about it, right? You don't get more salary or more personal benefit. Your institutions don't necessarily get any benefit.
For quite a long time in the past, society was shrouded in a culture where connections talk. So-called money for position deals and other corrupt practices gave rise to some unworthy academicians. Actually, quite a number of intellectuals or researchers who don't have connections excel in their work with their persistent dedication to their fields of study, but they will never become academicians. In the meantime, there are those who don't have impressive achievements but can use their connections to become one. Some academicians have made their way to the position with certain success, but they fail to offer more afterwards. This is not right. I think academicians should adhere to their pursuit of science and from their position exert efforts that would benefit the country and the public. Otherwise, they would feel indebted to the people and ashamed to enjoy privileged treatment from the country.
The institution's evaluations, one factor is how many members of the National Academy you have. So the institutions mobilize to support somebody, and so then, and there's a solution. The solution is simple. That is to decouple the benefits, the personal benefit and the institutional benefit from the academic honor. And so the reform is going on now. I mean, I heard that new policies coming out that the member of National Academy has to retire when they're 70s, because it's a lifelong, right? It's a lifelong thing. But now that basically you have no voting powers at certain age, and then at 70s you have to retire. You cannot apply for grants. That will limit, and it's a first step. It's a good step towards reforming the system, so that it's going out of hand. It's really impede, I would say, the advancement of science in China.
Plagiarism is one of the most pressing problems within China's academia. Elsevier is a world-leading publisher of scientific journals, such as Lancet and Cell. In October 2015, Elsevier retracted 9 papers worldwide due to fraud. All of them were from China. This again put the quality of papers from China under a harsh spotlight.
There are many reports of serious scientific issues and problems, such as plagiarism and corruption. The impression is that it is even more rooted in Chinese science than it is in other areas.
The mindset, the whole culture, there's a mentality that whoever have done it is the hero, regardless of the means that you use. So plagiarism is not being very well regarded as a bad thing, even by many in the universities.
In academia, the evaluation system is now based on the number of published theses and awards instead of researchers' real contributions. It is highly problematic.
Professors would need students to do the work. So that's very different from the United States or Europe, in that you have an infrastructure where you have a cadre of people like postdocs and technicians and other supporting staff, and even commercial sector that do some of the work. In China, the graduate students are the major workforce. And so in order for you to advance your discoveries or research, you need to hire a lot of students. And every student needs to graduate. And the system requires that you have to have a thesis, and you have to have, it's a measure of success. That is, number of papers, the citation impact of the papers, number of patents. And that's what's driven the huge increase of number of publications, number of patents. It's not a problem solving. So I think there's a great deal of effort needs to be put into. I would think of several things. One is a much stricter punishment. Two is an education to our students. And three is decouple the publications and scientific achievement with personal benefits. If you do all these, then things will change.
Culture Express. See the world in color.
You worked in a very large company, GSK, one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies. So how do you view this entire matrix of government, market, SOEs, state-owned enterprises, huge, small entrepreneurship? How does this mix all help?
Okay, for the government. Government funding and government policies and gearing towards stimulating entrepreneurship and stimulating small industry and high-tech based enterprise is a good thing. The problem with the government is they want to be in control. They want to maneuver and they want to basically tell people what to do. And that's a primary problem. I mean, you've seen, from central government and to local government, to even smaller regional governments, what they're trying to do, you see a lot of what's called science innovation incubator park. And in that park, they provide you space, they provide you funding, they provide you a lot of attractive things to recruit people to start a high-tech based companies there. And sometimes they play an investment role. Now that's been a problem. Investment or investors, are far better to be a private sector than, government. You have no experience. How do you know what to invest, right? So this has to be driven entirely by market.
A huge number of entrepreneurs in China are short of money, but they aim for world-changing achievements. They just need support to innovate and set up their businesses. Therefore, we're here to offer the support they need so that they can contribute to society in their own way. In my understanding, whether it is deregulation or direct offer of funding, both are supportive measures that encourage innovation and comply with the law.
So I think there's something need to be improved, and the area of improvement is that government has to change its role from calling the shots to provide a service. There's a few good examples. Suzhou Baobei is one of the few areas I think they're doing just the right thing. That is, there's about, 2 billion fund from the money comes from the government, but it's managed by professionals, not by government officials. Okay, and there's also incubator like that, but their mindset is to provide a service. For example, somebody with a good invention, with IP and with technology coming from the United States, they will ask them, what do you like to see in this area? Say, I don't see a gym, and they will build a gym there. So those kind of mindset, the government is there to help to provide a service, not calling the shots. Oh, you have to do this, and you have to do this area. If government gets into the decision making of what business to do, that's going to be bad.
As we are about to reform the funding mechanism in scientific research, I advocate two measures. One is pooling funds through tendering where everyone can make a bid. The other is taking advance payments and letting the final outcome dictate the retainage. If the project is delivered on time with good quality, more payments follow. I think it's practical to base the total sum of money on the actual result. Anyway, both measures guarantee a project's sustainable operation, And proper allocation of the money from these two channels will benefit young people as they start their own businesses.
Well, I think there's a need. Entrepreneur could be taught, could be trained. And there's a need for education. And this is not what I mean by, a professor teaching and then somebody sitting in the audience. Entrepreneur could be learned through practice, right? So you could have EIR, the entrepreneur in residence, that you're doing it, but somebody experienced could help you. And there's other areas of support that make you less likely to fail. I mean, entrepreneurs are going to fail for sure. Most of the case, but increase your success rate. So there's a education, there's an infrastructure, there's a service, a support that needed to help entrepreneur to be more likely to succeed. The third area you're talking about is a big what's called a state-owned enterprises. I would say they need to somewhat privatize. That is, private investment has to come in. The decision has to be made by experienced people who have done this before, rather than your government appointing somebody to be the CEO. And also the way of doing things has to be different. You have to be judged by market, by how well you're doing in the market, rather than whether you have accomplished what the government's assignment of. You produce how many TV sets, right? So that's not going to work. But I do see this conglomerates. These are big companies, by using merger and acquisition. I guess that's the area your expertise of collaborating with small high-tech companies or collaborating with Western companies. This will, because you have a big funding and big enterprise and big infrastructure that could do certain things that small companies cannot do. But that's more towards the later stage of the product development and even close to marketplace. Give an example of biotech. GSK can never do well. They keep saying that they're, innovation. I've been there for 4.5 years. It's not going to work. The best way to do that is to leave the innovation to small companies, and at the right time, you go do either merger acquisition, or you do collaboration, or you in-licensing some of them. That's the way to go, not through in-house. The conglomerates, there's never going to be innovation. The systems just prevent you from doing that.
One insight about China, underappreciated by foreign analysts, is the relevance of science for China's development and the reverence of science by China's leaders. But to realize its potential, science in China must change. Some scientists contend that the current system is hampering their work, especially how they're evaluated and how funds are allocated. Even more fundamental are critical thinking and creativity. The former to challenge conventional wisdom, accepted norms, and senior authorities, and the latter to develop new ideas, technologies, products, and services. But critical thinking and creativity have high inertia in rigid organizations, especially when position is based more on age and relationships than on merit and results. What to do? Science works in its own world. It operates optimally according to its own rules and ways of thinking. This means that brilliance bests continuity and productivity trumps seniority. As in many areas, government should assure the integrity of the system, but not be the system. Following China's science keeps us closer to China.